Social batteries are a weird thing. I wrote my entrance essay to this school on the qualities of introverts and how they can be used as a strength in college, but in reality, I don't really know if I've put that to use. I don't even know if I'd consider myself an introvert at this point. I'm equally content at a party with friends as I am by myself in my dorm making videos for fun. I don't find being alone a bad thing, whether it's from being an only child or just being generally independent, or maybe a little bit of both. I hardly ever get lonely, at least in the sense of needing to be around other people. Wanting a deeper connection is a different story, but I'm perfectly fine doing daily activities just in the company of myself. It only becomes a problem when the independence mixes with anxiety and I start justifying not putting myself out there with, oh, I can just do it myself. More than anything, I get FOMO, or I wouldn't really call it FOMO because FOMO insinuates that you're missing out on something you want to do. I would call it the outcome of having different interests and feeling like I'm missing out as a result of that. This didn't used to bother me, and I'm not entirely sure when it did. Sometime between when I started caring too much about what other people thought and when I started paying too much attention to how I act, I began to find myself trying to blend into crowds. And you can take that both literally and metaphorically. And I wouldn't consider myself self-conscious as in insecure, but I am self-conscious in the way that I'm overly aware of how I present myself to the point where this awareness interferes with my confidence. I think this all manifests in different ways, the biggest of which is me being absolutely awful at responding to messages. I'm on my phone all the time, yet I have 145 unopened text messages and 32 unopened Snapchats. I think a good part of this is because I overanalyze the best way to respond to a conversation so long that I either don't have the energy to respond or simply forget to, which is really hypocritical of me since I prefer deep friendships over face value ones. It's a little hard to form a connection with someone who hardly ever texts back. And I'm not saying that this only manifests itself in negative contexts. I genuinely do appreciate the versatility of not being fully introverted or extroverted, but yeah, social batteries are a weird thing. Growing up in the 2000s meant growing up as the first generation with social media. While I can say the majority of my childhood was spent playing outside, I'd be lying if I didn't mention core memories on Webkinz and Movie Star Planet. But slowly, those evenings on the family computer watching Stampy Cat and My Life as Ava turned to arguments with my mom about why I was the only kid in my grade still not allowed to have Snapchat or Instagram. The feelings of social isolation overpowered any chance of me understanding where my mom's concern was coming from. And I didn't really notice how it was affecting me until I realized the nose I looked at in the mirror was not the nose that I sent in my Snapchat streaks. Slowly, the smile I shone in every post turned to a slight smirk, and my pose turned to whatever contortion would make my waist appear smaller. I would consider myself a secure person, but that didn't prevent me from seeing my following feed like a checklist of things I was and things I wasn't. After all, comparison is like a big Venn diagram of you and other people, where you are constantly trying to fit more and more of yourself into the overlapping area of similarities while diminishing the part that actually matters, individuality. And I know they always say social media is a highlight reel, but that didn't truly hit me until I noticed how normalized photoshopping yourself had become even amongst people I knew. In one of my media classes, we learned that regardless of how good you think you are at differentiating real from fake, your brain almost always first perceives visual media as true. The frustration I felt when I finally recognized the amount of mental energy I had spent comparing myself to facades could not be directed at anyone other than me, as much as I wanted to. And in that moment, I realized other people were not responsible for my personal insecurities, and any negative habits that I had picked up as a result of comparison were on me to revert. Which is not an easy task, considering when comparison becomes a habitual way of perceiving images, that can turn into unconscious processing. Yet there is something to be said about the cycle of insecurity that is creating this problem in the first place. Like how one person's projection of it affects another's self-image and so on. But shaming people for how they present themselves on social media really isn't the way to fix this. The big problem is not that people change themselves for social media, it's that they feel the need to in the first place. And at the end of the day, approaching an issue enshrouded in deprecation can't be fixed with more criticism. I'm not saying this to paint a negative picture of social media as a whole. I love social media. I grew up idolizing my favorite creators and making videos in my room, many of which I never posted. And I'm literally in a media school. But I'm starting to recognize the importance of mentally separating social media from reality. There are so many positive aspects of social media, and I think we all have a collective responsibility to try to make the environment as uplifting as we can. And when that ultimately fails, we have a responsibility to ourselves to reflect and say, the way I currently exist is enough, and I do not need to look to social media for a map of how to live my life. I've always struggled with friendships. Prior to college, I seemed to just fall into them. I don't ever remember making a conscious effort to create a connection with people. They kind of just happened due to proximity, like classes or clubs or mutual friends. This is probably the outcome of growing up in a small town, in a suburban neighborhood, and attending a smallish high school. But after a year at a big state university, I realized that proximity won't always mean shared values, and in order to create friendships that would last longer than a semester, I needed to do more than expect connections to just happen. Yet by the time I actually needed to build friendships, my energy to do so felt like it had been spent on people who would use my effort, support, and kindness to inflate their own self-worth by diminishing mine. My ability to form connections was impaired by many rocky endings to friend groups that left me feeling unwanted and unsure of myself and my own sense of reality. I've always been the sidewalk friend, or the friend who include everyone else because they know what it feels like to be left out themselves. I know what it feels like to be intentionally socially ostracized while being told nothing is wrong, or to walk into a room only to be treated like a ghost by friends trying to maintain their own social status. And those feelings stuck with me like morning fog. They would dissipate enough until it was time again for me to meet new people. Like clockwork, I would re-feel all of that anxiety, self-doubt, and insecurity. I've always viewed my ability to read people as a strength, but awareness does not come without consequences. I've let situations hurt me long after they happened, details spinning around in my head trying to grasp some reason for how things unfolded the way they did, often putting fault on myself because self-blaming was easier than accepting some things don't have a clear reason. And while now I recognize that how people treat others is often a reflection of themselves, this realization didn't come without nights spent feeling like there was something wrong with me. Going to a big school was my way of escaping friendship drama. I never again wanted to feel stuck in a situation where I felt like I had no one to turn to. To me, a place with 50,000 people meant 50,000 new doors to open. And while I didn't account for how intimidating it would be to make friends at a big school, I'm forever grateful for the people I've met here, even those who I haven't kept in contact with. And something I'm coming to terms to is that friendships exist on different levels, and that's okay. There's value in having both close friendships and just people you like to be around, even if you don't have a deep emotional connection. While now I can look back at past friendships with less resentment and more appreciation for both good memories and the lessons I had to learn, sometimes I still wish I could go back to the girl whose personality hadn't been inhibited by worrying she was too much, or whose naivety and loyalty hadn't been broken, and whose empathy and forgiveness was completely limitless. But I know that girl would be so proud of where I am now and how I have grown into a person that is able to set boundaries and is willing to prioritize their own personal peace.